Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. It is time for the July Q&A. We are flying through this year. It's about to get busy, which is good.
Yes, so we'll probably start flying even more, which is just going to be a lot of fun, I reckon.
Yep, not enough days in the month soon. But anyway, before we get to all of that, Q&A time. So we've asked you guys to give us your best questions and we've made a list. So we're going to get through them. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Be Quiet's new range of Silent Wings 4 high-performance fans. Silent Wings 4 can not only be used as case fans, but are ideal for use on heat sinks and radiators, making them highly flexible thanks to a newly engineered design that reduces the distance between the fan blades and fan frame, allowing for maximum air pressure. Moreover, each fan's armed with a 6-pole motor featuring 3 phases for very low power consumption, less vibration, and crucially, virtually inaudible operation at regular speeds. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. All right, Tim, what do you think of the idea of upgrading straight to 4K if you have an older CPU like the 47 at 90K? I've seen the data where when paired with a 3080, you only lose about 5 to 15 FPS depending on the game. 1% lows are also only affected by 5 to 15 FPS when compared to a 3080 on a modern CPU. Is it a good route to go if you want to save money and upgrade to 4K without upgrading the rest of the system? So basically, we're talking about here, most games are pretty GPU limited. But I always find these questions, and I imagine this one was pretty upvoted, which is why you picked it. And a lot of people always ask about the 4K gaming, but I always find these questions a bit interesting because it goes about it in a bit of a weird way. So I guess we're talking about the upgrading thing here. The CPU and the motherboard, the CPU particularly, is quite an important component to ensure smooth gameplay, an enjoyable experience all around, and just generally good computing, like if you want to maybe do some productivity or whatever. I guess what I'm getting at here is we're talking about gaming, aren't we? So we're not really talking 60 hertz panels. So if you want a high refresh rate 4K panel, which is what you'd be investing in if you're going there with an RTX 3080.
Yeah, if you're upgrading to 4K today, I would not recommend a 60 hertz monitor.
Absolutely
you should be
not
going,
for gaming.
Yeah, 144
Even
hertz.
for productivity, 60 hertz kind of sucks. But so I guess the point I'm about to make is this: the CPU and motherboard combo is the absolute cheapest part of that entire upgrade process. So why skimp on it? So what would you say? Let's say 28-inch 4K 144 hertz panel. Where do they generally start?
You're looking at like minimum $600 US, I'd
for
say.
A decent panel.
For a decent one.
Okay.
One that I'd recommend. But even then, that's kind of like almost the minimum level.
Okay.
For,
let's just go with that figure now. So $600 there. RTX 3080s, $800 US. I think the latest
at the moment, around
pricing
that.
update.
Yep.
So is it $250 for a Ryzen 7 5700X, and then an entry, not even entry level, like a decent B550 motherboard that can support like 12 core CPUs quite comfortably? They're like $100. So let's say $350.
Yep.
So that's less than half the price of the GPU, and it's roughly half the price of a decent, well, an entry level monitor, really, what we're talking about, an entry level 4K gaming monitor. So if you're investing all that money, why use the CPU? And I guess, and I don't really know in the context here, like 5 to 15 FPS, 1% lows. If you're talking about, because you're going to 4K, you're probably going for around 60 FPS anyway, some instances 80, 90. 15 FPS drop of 1% lows there, that can be like up to 20%. Or if you're going below 60 FPS, more than that. So that's quite a substantial performance loss. And it's also how much those 1% lows fluctuate as well as to how noticeable stuttering and stuff like that is. The 4790K, I would be limiting that to an entry-level CPU with entry-level hardware for an entry-level gaming experience. I think I wanted to say mad. I don't want to disrespect the person that made this comment. I guess they're asking the question, but having tested all myself, I think it's a bit of a mad combo to go with an RTX 3080 with such an old Core i7 processor that it's really very entry level in 2022.
It's a real min-max system, isn't it?
Very
min-max. Like you're looking at like below Core i3.
You've got older USB standards. M.2 drives, I don't believe were thought of at the time.
And I think we'll start to see games over the next couple of years use more and more CPU resources because we're kind of at the point where the sort of typical CPU that a person has in their system is a lot better than
Yeah.
a 4790K. So even if you're playing at 4K and you're expecting a lot of GPU limitations, things like ray tracing can increase your CPU load, which I believe is a question that's coming up later in the Q&A. We've got, potentially Unreal Engine 5, which appears to have a lot more CPU intensive things that can be enabled in that engine. So even if you're thinking right now with your extremely min-max setup that most of the load's going to be on the GPU, if you're doing this big upgrade and in a couple of years the CPU is getting slaughtered by games even at 4K, you're going to be regretting it a bit.
Do you think better advice would be, so 1440p high refresh rate, what price are you looking at there for a good quality monitor?
Oh, you can get one for like $250, $300.
So a good quality one, $300.
Yeah, for like half the price of 4K.
So I think, given that information, the best advice would be ignore 4K because it's not really worth it anyway. Get a good quality panel, so a better quality panel than what you would have got had you jumped up to 4K for half as much money, and then the half as much money you save, so the $300, let's say $350, buy yourself a new CPU and motherboard, get all the new features, get much better performance, a much better overall system, and leave the 4K thing for your next monitor upgrade well down the track.
Yeah, and I think with 4K as well, you sort of, even though that like $600 is not the worst price, and they've come down a lot, I feel like if you're going to do a big 4K upgrade to high-end stuff, you're missing out on HDR there as sort of a feature, which at the moment adds another, you're almost doubling the cost again. So a 1440p, I agree, is sort of like a really good sort of intermediary point.
I think we've talked about this before, and I think the audience largely agreed, at least those who have done it. The upgrade from 1080p to 1440p is quite substantial, but the upgrade from 1440p to 4K at, say, a 30-inch size panel isn't as substantial.
Yeah, it isn't as noticeable.
It isn't as noticeable. So while it's still, I just went from I used to game exclusively at 4K. Now that I've started streaming, I've gone down to 1440p, and honestly,
it's pretty similar, isn't it?
It's pretty similar.
Yeah, that's why I was sort of thinking that a 4K HDR upgrade is kind of like that's the next big step, which at the moment is still very expensive.
And I should say, initially, I had to go down to 1080p for the first few streams because of the card I was using, and that was terrible. That was terrible. But 1440p, yeah, I don't notice a difference too much. So my advice would be forget the 4K thing, get yourself a good quality 1440p monitor, look at Tim's reviews, and get yourself a new CPU and motherboard, and you will have spent the same amount of money, but I think you'd be much happier. Higher frame rates too. All right, Tim, don't smile. Keep it together. All right, here's the question. You ready? What do you make of Intel's recent Tech Media Tour? I'm having to do a lot of single-handed quotation marks for these guys.
I'll do them for you.
Thank you. Tech Media Tour with Arc. I've seen a lot of people praising them for being more open. This is going smoothly. But to me, it just feels like they're stalling and not really saying anything interesting. So you've seen the Gamers Nexus thing. So Tom Peterson came out and talked about the frame stuff, which was all right. But I was quite interested.
There was a Linus video as well, wasn't there?
I didn't see the Linus one. Sorry, Linus. I only have so much time to watch the same sort of guys be interviewed or do. I gave it to Steve. Steve's. Back to you, Steve. I found the smooth sync. Do you see the smooth sync?
It was interesting.
That sort of comes into your neighborhood a bit there.
I think they'd announced that previously at maybe when they were talking about Arc laptops a couple.
Yeah, I wouldn't have paid attention at all.
But it's cool to get more information on that stuff.
I was quite impressed by it. When I first saw what they were doing, I was like, oh, yeah, whatever, pretty gimmicky, but
seemed to work okay.
Seemed to work pretty well. Seemed like a pretty interesting technology that, really did smooth out, if you will, those tears caused by not having VSync enabled, which you don't want to have VSync enabled if you're a gamer that has any kind of self-respect.
Although it does increase latency.
Yes, well,
running smooth sync. I think.
Okay, well, we haven't tested it.
No, I asked Intel and they said it did.
Yeah, no, but I don't know how by much. I'm not necessarily.
I think they actually gave me a number.
Oh, really?
So I can't quite. I think it was like maybe 1 millisecond or something. It's just not heaps.
Okay, yeah. Well,
anyway,
I'm not necessarily advocating for it. I'm just saying the demo looked impressive. Obviously, we have to test it and stuff like that. But it is a feature that you will get for free with Arc GPUs, whether you want to use it or not.
So I think, the question is whether, it feels like Intel is stalling by doing all this. Well, I mean, they kind of haven't really said all that much about their cards to begin with.
Yeah.
So was the plan always to release later than now? I'm sure it probably wasn't, and they probably should have gotten cards out earlier than now. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it feels like stalling. But I definitely agree that they should be releasing
the question was more, what do we make of Intel's recent tech media tour, and then the Discord member was saying they're interpreting it as stalling. So personally, I think it's great.
I don't think it's stalling, no.
But it doesn't matter whether that's what he thinks. That we don't have to touch on that. I think it's great. I think it's awesome that Intel's actually not this faceless, shady corporation, which is what a lot of people see them. I know they have the PR guys that do all that, but
that's what they've been like for a long time.
Yeah, and people you guys, the PC tech enthusiast community, I don't want to speak for everyone, and maybe I get this wrong, but they don't necessarily respect the PR guys, the faces up there trying to BS you with like ice chillers behind the scenes, or that garbage that goes on, manipulating numbers, and I think there's very little respect for that side of the game. Whereas AMD has Robert Halleck or other, even he's a technical PR guy, I suppose, but they have other engineers and things that have come out and done interviews or done stuff, and makes AMD seem a bit more personable. I don't know. People seem to like that a bit more. And I think Tom Peterson did an awesome job with Steve, really comfortable. He was enjoyable to watch. I think he did an excellent job, and I think that's a really good thing for Intel. And I read over the comments on the Gamers Nexus video, and that was certainly the reception from the viewers there.
Yeah, I think maybe it would have come across more as stalling or something like that if they'd announced the cards and were like, you can buy them on this date, and then instead of actually releasing on that date, they sort of, instead did this big tour sort of thing. But yeah, they haven't even sort of really released or announced a release, like when you'll actually be able to buy these cards, at least for the majority of the world. So yeah, it just feels like this is more like a natural progression towards the launch. And yeah, like I said, yes, ideally they would have released the cards before now, but Intel should be doing these sorts of things in the lead up to when you'll be able to buy the products, because by giving you guys more information about the products, it's going to give you more insights into what you'll be actually end up buying.
You're saying stall or not stall, regardless of the situation there, we think what they've been doing is good.
Yeah.
It's a step in the right direction, and we'd like to see more of it.
Yeah, I'd like to see Nvidia do more of this stuff, to be honest. I mean, they've got employees that can do this as well. And often when they're about to launch products, they really do not give very much information. So by being more open, I think that would benefit consumers as well. But yeah.
I couldn't agree more about Nvidia. They really, I think, as they start to see more competition and stuff, that'd be
nice.
A good thing for Nvidia, I think, with their standing in the tech community. But anyway, that's a separate subject, but we'll move on. All right. Tim tells me this question was quite heavily upvoted, which is why I included it, but I'm probably going to have to call on Tim to help me understand this one. So the question reads, does the cache on the 5800X 3D minimize the need for fast RAM? So the answer there is yes. Or at least we don't know if that's specifically what causes it, but it is actually. It is because, So as long as one has enough RAM to avoid hitting the page file, there's some sort of disconnect there, because that's a separate...
Doesn't seem that relevant.
It's not... Yeah, that's the part that confuses me, because that's more RAM capacity than it is fast RAM.
Yeah.
So, and then the rest, then the next part of the question goes, any chance Hub and BuildZoid would do a collaboration video about the importance of RAM speed / capacity and CPU cache to help us normies properly balance out daily driver gaming PC builds? So, always up for a collab with BuildZoid. We're actually meant to do one. I sort of let BuildZoid down, unfortunately, so apologies, BuildZoid. I was going to do some 12th gen memory timing testing for games and stuff, which, I'd still like to do. We've just had a lot of things come up, and I had a bit of a lull there where I could do it, but other stuff came out pretty quickly. But yeah, massive amount of respect to BuildZoid and all the work he does and his knowledge and all that stuff. So yeah, we love BuildZoid and we'd love to work with him. So that answers that part of the question. But as for, like, I suppose the importance of RAM speed and capacity, yeah, as you've sort of noticed with the 5800X 3D, at least the speed part does depend on the CPU, the platform, the architecture, all that stuff. Capacity kind of depends on what you're doing, how important capacity is. As we've sort of just found with the multitasking stuff, if you're just playing the game and don't really have anything else going on, by and large, I still believe 16 gigabytes of memory is acceptable. But if you've got Chrome tabs open, multiple monitors, so they're not being actually shuffled to page filed background tasks. They're active foreground tasks. Then we're probably at a point now where 32 gigabytes really does make sense, and I'm using that regularly now in all the systems I put together. But again, they're sort of questions that depend. And even fast RAM, it's 5800X 3D versus the 5800X. We've seen that low latency memory does benefit the non 3D model more. But you have to make to show memory performance has always been a bit of a funny one, because you really have to benchmark to show the effects of it's a very CPU limited testing, which is applicable for some games and scenarios, but a lot of games are still you're going to end up being predominantly GPU bound. So how much it matters again depends on the game. But I think by and large, most gamers, they're not going to notice whether they do or don't tune their memory timings, and the gains will be small because, again, they're primarily GPU limited. But of course, that depends on the game. All right, interesting one here. Do you think Nvidia will be brave enough to go for an MSRP rise on the 4000 series upcoming? They have shown the insane pricing people are willing to pay. All they need to do is create their own supply shortage, like the gold and diamond industry do. So I'll just start by saying I don't think they can do that, because they didn't create. I think a lot of people thought that AMD and Nvidia had created some sort of artificial supply shortage, whereas it's pretty self-evident now that they were cranking out as many as they possibly could. It's just that miners were snapping them up as fast as they could. The second that mining tap turned off, they've now just got boatloads of inventory that they're discounting and trying to get rid of, and they're worried about. So Nvidia can't do it, and AMD certainly aren't willing to go into cahoots with them and make that happen, because they've got the Ryzen 7000 series. They want to claw back some sort of market share or gain some sort of market share. So Nvidia will have to be competitive on pricing within reason. And we've already seen that. Obviously, I think we were a little concerned about price creep and stuff like that, or very concerned about that months ago. And while it's still a concern, we've seen that they can't go stupid. So the RTX 3090 Ti at $2,000 US was the very definition of stupid. We said it at the time, but they were selling initially because miners or desperate gamers, probably more so desperate gamers, were snapping them up. And then as soon as the demand from cryptocurrency turned off and they'd been out for a little while, the prices came down very rapidly. It was very soon after launch that they started getting down. I think they're at least $500 US off now compared to where they were, which is still a dumb price. $1,500 US for 3090 Ti. I definitely don't do that right now. But I think given all that information, the 4000 series or the GeForce 40 series isn't going to be as bad as what people think. Now, famous last words, I could be very wrong on that one.
At least as bad as people thought it might be. Mm-hmm. I think with all these discussions, it's always important to remember the sort of the naming issues that tend to come up with these things. You know, it may be the case where a product like the 4070 is not a $500 card anymore, and it's now a $600 card, which some people would say, oh, that's price creep, because compare one number to the previous number and, you know, it's looking quite bad. But if the price to performance increase, which is really the only thing that matters for these discussions in terms of can they increase prices? If the price to performance goes up substantially, then the fact that that card is now $100 more expensive is offset by the fact that the performance is so much higher. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about, is Nvidia going to raise prices? Because you know, they might be able to get away with a $2,000 flagship GPU, which would be very expensive, and people are like, oh, that's so expensive. But if the more reasonable cards that people are buying are giving you substantially more performance per dollar that you're spending, then I would say that they haven't increased the price, even if tier-wise you compare them and it looks a bit more expensive. What would be bad is more of a Turing generation where the parts are either the same price, you get very little price to performance improvement,
which we suspect they won't be able to afford to do.
And I don't think they'll be able
7000
to.
series.
Yes.
This should be in a lot of ways the most positive GPU generation that we've seen in quite some time, because AMD should be highly competitive. They were very competitive with the 6000 series, but of course that didn't matter to gamers. So I really think this generation could be well, a good outcome for gamers. So we'll see. We'll see on that
Yeah.
one.
I guess what I'm hoping for is that we don't see companies start limiting like the lowest end cards to $400. That would be bad. I think that would be class for calling it a sort of a price raise. But if these companies are still willing to produce $300, $200 GPUs at some point,
Yeah.
then we could be in for quite
Again,
a good
as we've said
generation.
though, that really does come down to buyers at large. So if
Yep.
$400 is the entry level and people aren't willing to pay that and they're seeing a lot less GPU sales than what their forecast are expected to see, then prices will probably start to go down, which is what we saw with the 3090 Ti.
Yep.
So they're not really up for having boatloads of inventory and graphics cards sitting on shelves. They want them out the door. They'd very much like to see a continuation of 2020 and 2021, which is not going to happen. So they're going to try and do the best job possible. All right, Tim, can you please get the quotation?
I'll get my tool
Air
ready.
quotes ready, please. All right. Should Intel just go out and release Arc, even if the drivers are not ready enough in some games? What about just releasing it with a list of approved performance games? Honestly, I don't think there's a good option for them here. I think delaying Arc further will be bad, for lack of a better term. I was going to say something else, but let's go with bad. And I think rushing it out the door is possibly the better of the two options.
Yeah.
It's equally bad and damaging as well, but I mean, it's sort of an 11th gen type situation in my opinion. Having said that, I think they should have never released 11th gen, period.
Yes.
The Arc stuff, that's yet to be seen. But see, 11th gen was a stinky product based on our thumbnail, and they could never make it better unless they slash prices. That's really it. With Arc, they've got they can do both. So with Arc, they can develop the drivers, which is possibly easier to do with the community testing and using them as well and giving feedback. So they can develop the drivers, which hopefully will improve performance. And if they have to, they can reduce prices as well to make the products more appealing and easier to sell. So I think really, the best option, as I said, there's really no good option, but the best one I think would be to release it and do the best to fix it. Because we've seen AMD release somewhat broken products and fix them quite quickly and turn them into really great products.
Yeah, I think with the driver situation, I think people are expecting now quite firmly the drivers to be bad.
Which is good. Which is good.
Like
expectations are
very low. So I think if you're releasing now with bad drivers or 3 months when the drivers are probably going to be bad but maybe 5% better, you kind of the perception is still going to be fairly similar.
It's a cyberpunk situation.
Fairly similar. Yeah. So obviously ideally Intel should have released a product with really solid drivers, which would have been an incredibly difficult task and was always going to be quite an issue for Intel with this generation. But I think the expectations of they're just settled to where they're at really. So from my perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to continue waiting, provided that the hardware is suitable. And the longer that they wait, the longer they are going to run into next generation cards from the big two in the
their
market.
next generation as well.
Their next generation GPU prices continue to get lower. So we were sort of saying earlier this year that they needed to get the cards out effectively as soon as possible before GPU availability started to take a massive turn for the better, which it did.
They've missed their golden opportunity for sure.
So they kind of missed a bit of an opportunity there. But the driver issue, obviously, they've I think at this point, Intel has already copped it over the drivers. People have already said their piece on the drivers suck. Everyone knows
they knew that was coming.
Yeah.
That's why they weren't committed to massive shipments. This was always about getting their foot in the door, establishing themselves as a discrete GPU maker, and building from there. That was always the plan.
So, again, the perception's been set. Everyone's said their piece largely about drivers, so they can pretty much just move forward from that position now. It is what it is. So they're just going to have to prove via execution that that's going to improve over time and get better and better and better. And I expect that it will because... even when you look back at some of Intel's integrated graphics drivers over the years, there have been games that have been very, very broken that have improved over time. Performance has improved, and it seems like they're definitely aware of the problem. So I expect there's big resources going into it to improve it over time.
Yeah, can't wait to keep testing it over and over again and see where it goes from here. but we will have our first A380 review, I think like the day after this video goes up. It'll be in
Possibly.
the next day or so anyway. So it's coming, and then I'll do a big 50 game benchmark, and we'll have that data there. And then if new drivers come, we can retest and so on and so forth. All right, Tim, I think this one will be a good one for you to answer because it's about laptops and you're a laptop expert.
Oh, rare laptop question.
Yeah,
Nice.
maybe we should call up Jared and see what he thinks. With all the talk of don't buy now for PC components, particularly GPUs with new products on the horizon, do you think this advice remains sound for people in the market for a new laptop? So is there any new laptop stuff you should be waiting out for, or is it just is now as good a time as any?
I think what we've seen the last couple of years is that gaming laptops specifically, so if you're after something with a nice beefy discrete GPU, those tend to launch right at the start of the year. So around January, February has been the case for the last couple of releases. So yeah, I'd probably... We're kind of mid-cycle based on that. If it's July, they normally come out in February, then we're right in the middle. So it's kind of that classic, do you wait, do you buy now? I think I'm not convinced that we will see the next generation of GPUs for laptops in the very early parts of next year.
I wouldn't have thought so.
We might, but it seems very close to when next-gen GPUs for desktops are launching. And generally speaking, the laptop parts can take quite a bit longer than that, especially because a company like Nvidia is most likely going to want to launch like a 4080, 4070, 4060, all roughly around the same time so that OEMs can release all their different products all at once. So that may be, we might see like a mid-cycle refresh, in which case if we're then talking a year in the future, it doesn't make a lot of sense to wait necessarily. But
no, I think if you can wait, if you've got a reasonably decent laptop at the moment, probably wait, which is the advice we give for most things, because we're midway through the cycle, so you get the value for the period of time you can use it. So you've already missed a good chunk of that. Unless you come across an exceptionally good deal that you know to be a good deal, then it might be worth it. So if you can get some sort of mid-cycle discount that makes it worthwhile, then sure.
Yeah, and I think as well, we're sort of mid-cycle in a generation of laptops where the GPU side of things wasn't substantially upgraded. It was a lot of like minor improvements. Like I think we got TI models for some of the laptops. So yeah, I think for gaming laptops, wait if you can, if you must buy. You could probably get a couple of good deals at the moment. Maybe check out a channel like Jared's Tech that'll be able to give you all that information. I think for ultra portable laptops like your sort of the slim and light stuff that we're looking at now is actually a really good time to buy.
Okay.
If you can find something that uses AMD's mythical 6800U, which seems to be completely absent from the market, very, very difficult to find. That has technically just launched or is supposed to have just launched and does offer very competitive performance, good efficiency, and a big uplift to the integrated graphics. So considering we're sort of right at the start of that cycle, it's a really good part. And even if you're looking at it as a productivity laptop or for a bit of very slim and light gaming, that part I think does make sense. But I would still expect an Intel refresh towards either the end of this year or early next year with whatever the 13th generation brings for laptops. So again, it kind of depends on what you want there. If you're after the GPU side of things, it's probably pretty good to get an ultra portable. If it's more CPU, then I guess you could consider waiting. But around this time is when we tend to see a lot of the major ultra portable releases, sort of the back to school period for the US, which I think is around August, and the sort of holiday season when a lot of those laptops come out. So it could be a good time to buy.
All right, going to hit pause there on part one. Good job answering questions as always, Tim. Glad to have you by my side.
Oh, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Love how sincere that was. But did enjoy it. I'll try and keep it together to finish this wrap up of part one.
You just can't take my acceptance of the compliment. I just don't know what's going on here. Anyway,
the way you said it. But no, it was a lot of fun, very good, and we do have a part two coming up. I think that'll be on the channel. Probably, I think there's a video squeezed in between the Q&A.
I believe so. Yeah.
So wait another day, and you can watch part two. It'll be worth the wait. But as always, thank you to all of those of you who asked questions. Much appreciated. And if you'd like to become a Hardware Unboxed community member and ask more questions, then we have Floatplane and Patreon in the links below. And what will that give you, Tim?
Well, we just did our live stream, which
Mhm.
was a bit of fun this week.
Mhm.
A lot of interesting stuff in that one if you want to go watch it. BTS videos,
Yep, we do behind the scenes videos. We have
Discord chat.
Discord chat.
Yep.
Tim's busy in hashtag monitors there quite often.
Yep.
And yeah, behind the scenes content, which I think you mentioned. Tim's building a new studio, so there's been a couple of videos and there's more to come.
Definitely will be more to come. Installation's almost in, so another video will be done there and more BTS videos, which is always fun.
Good stuff. So yeah, thanks to those who are already supporting. And yeah, if you do want to check it out, check it out. But if not, perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.